Created by Shozu Kaga and Gunpei Yokoi, the Fire Emblem series has had a rich history as one of the first tactical RPG series ever conceived. Yet, the series' presence in the West is a rather recent event, with only 5 out of the 13 installments released in North America. Its rise in popularity in the West and decision for release was due to the appearance of Marth and Roy in Nintendo's all-star fighting game, Super Smash Bros. Melee, in 2001. With the two mysterious sword fighters' presence in the GameCube's best-selling game, and the commercial success of Intelligent Systems' other strategy series Advance Wars, Nintendo decided it was the right time to bring Fire Emblem to the West. Fire Emblem Rekka No Ken was released on the Game Boy Advance on April 25, 2003 in Japan, and in North America on November 3rd the same year. It was the first game in the series to be released outside of Japan, but the 7th installment overall. In a similar fashion to Final Fantasy IV, the title, which originally meant Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, was simply titled Fire Emblem. The story was a prequel, taking place 20 years before Fuen no Tsurugi, revealing more of the backstory and the ancient history of the nation Eli. Long ago, dragons and humans lived together in peace and harmony, sharing with each other wisdom and knowledge. All of that changes when humanity wages a terrible war against their former equals. This savage time became known as the Scouring. 8 legendary heroes lead the battles, winning the Scouring, causing the defeated dragons to disappear from the nation of Elib. These leaders would be known as the 8 Legends, founders of the 8 territories of Elib. Nearly 1 millennium later, players assumed the role of a tactician, found unconscious in the plains of Sake, and the tale of a plain swordswoman named Lyn. For the first 11 chapters, players guided Lyn and her many allies on her quest to save her grandfather from his power-hungry brother, Lundgren. A year later, the main quest begins with the adventure of Eliwood, father of Roy, alongside his childhood friend Hector, father of Lilina. Eliwood had already helped out Lyn in her tale. Now he searched for his father Albert, only to discover a plot that threatened to plunge the world into the dark times of the Scouring, and the mastermind behind the scheme, Nergal. Nergal's plot was to open the Dragon's Gate and call forth dragons in order to steal their life energy, called quintessence, and to become the most powerful being alive. In order to open the gate, he needed the power of Ninian or Nils, 2 mysterious twins who turned out to be dragons in human shape. With his powerful morphs and the assassins known as the Black Fang under his control, Eliwood, Hector, the returning Lyn and their allies sought out the Archsage Athos and obtained the sacred sword of fire Durandal in order to put an end to Nergal's madness and save the land of Elib from a fiery grave. The plot was told before and after every chapter, rewarding players who completed the stage with another piece of the narrative, and encouraging the players to continue on in their turn-based war. At the heart of the story was a battle that needed to be won, in turn-based strategic simulation. Players chose a limited amount of characters from their ranks and armed them with weapons, items, and staves before pinning them against enemy units. Units moved across the map on a grid base, but could only move up, down, left, or right. Units could engage in combat against enemies, rescue, support, or use staves on fellow allies, enter villages, or even talk to foes and former friends in order to get them to join your ranks. Mounted units such as Pegasus Knights could partake in one action and move before ending their turn, with the exception of combat. Combat was decided by the unit's stats and the weapons they wielded. In a similar fashion to the rock, paper, scissors mechanics of Pokemon, one weapon type was more effective against another, and vice versa. Swords beat axes, axes bested lances, and lances beat swords. This mechanic was introduced in Seizo no Keifu, and has since then become known as the weapons triangle. Magic had its own triangle formed by anima, dark, and light magic. Only bows were exempt from the weapons triangle, though, in return, they couldn't attack directly. If a unit was fast enough or wielded special weaponry, they could strike an opponent twice in one turn. After the player moved all of their units or ended their turn, the enemy AI would begin theirs, and then, if there were any, other units would make their move. This cycle would continue until either the player emerged victorious or defeated. Some maps required you to seize a certain location, while others put you on the defense for a set amount of turns. In addition, obstacles and weather conditions hindered mobility of units. It was up to the player to decide the best possible route and units to carry out each mission. Every unit type had different uses inside and outside of combat. Cavaliers were incredibly mobile, so they could take an injured unit from the front lines to the back to be healed. Mages could attack from near and afar, though their versatility was countered by their low HP and defense. These were fast to get open doors and chests, but were fairly weak in combat. What's more, each character had a distinct personality, and some were necessary for recruiting new units. The player needed to decide between their favorite character, units best suited for each battle, possible new recruits, and the use of terrain to their advantage, as they would often be outnumbered, but never outmatched. RPG elements such as health, magic, speed, skill, and other stats were present as you leveled up, though these elements in Fire Emblem were never as complex as traditional RPGs like Dragon Quest. One might excel in dodging blows with counterattacks that are accurate but deal minimal damage, while another one has incredible firepower but moves rather slowly and has inaccurate attacks. After reaching level 10, players were given the option to use a special item to promote units to a new class, with larger stat capabilities and a hearty bonus to their current stats, though some units like Marcus the Paladin came pre-promoted, and therefore couldn't upgrade to a second class. One mechanic that quickly became synonymous with Fire Emblem was permanent death. When a character dies, they stay dead for the rest of the game, or retreated for plot convenience. Whichever of the two, the rule was the same. When a unit's HP hit 0, they could no longer be used for battle. The exception to this rule is during Lynn's chapter. Any fallen characters would automatically return at either Eliwood or Hector's Tail. You could still continue on with your adventure, but if Lord Eliwood, Lynn, or Hector were killed, players would be greeted by the flames at the game over screen. For perfectionists and players who grew attached to their troops, this meant either leaving a friend behind, or tweaking your strategy in order to overcome the odds. In addition to regular narrative, some units could engage in support conversations on the battlefield that gave them bonus to characters within 3 spaces from one another. Characters could have a maximum of 5 support conversations that rank from level C to A, meaning players could decide on a high-level support with large benefits to a certain stat, or several weaker ones that gave well-rounded bonuses. The conversations helped define each character's personalities in a deep manner, as well as slightly changing the ending for certain characters. Often characters with the level A support will continue to be friends, meet a bittersweet end, or marriage. In some cases, it would even change the entire ending, while other times friends would be reunited on the battlefield, not as allies, but as enemies. Fire Emblem was hailed by critics and gamers for its masterful story, the complexity of the large roster of characters, the challenging strategy, as well as the quality of the soundtrack among many things. One minor criticism was the multiplayer mode, which many felt was unnecessary. Still, the excellent single-player campaign made more than enough compensation for the multiplayer shortcomings. Fire Emblem was a commercial success, selling 490,000 copies in North America alone. It should be noted that no Fire Emblem game has sold over 1 million copies, although Fire Emblem came close with over 970,000 copies sold worldwide. Regardless, it became a fan favorite in the series for its near-perfect mirroring of gameplay and narrative, and telling one of the finest tales in gaming history. In 2006, Fire Emblem was voted 51st on IGN's Reader's Choice Top 100 Best Games Ever, beating out popular titles at the time such as The Elder Scrolls IV and Rome Total War. The same year, Fire Emblem was ranked 41st out of 200 Nintendo games in Nintendo Power's Top 200 Nintendo Games of all time. Fire Emblem proved that the series had a place in the West, as a fantastic tactical role-playing game able to prove its brilliance in the West long after its foundation in the East. Come back next week as we take a look at the second Fire Emblem game released for North America, the third for the Game Boy Advance, and the only one to share a subtitle with the Double Dragon franchise. Alright, so now that we got the formality out of the way, what do I honestly think of the first Fire Emblem game ever released in North America? To put it simply, this is one of my favorite games of all time. Fire Emblem Rekka No Ken is about as perfect as a tactical RPG can get. It has an excellent story, great characters, a massive amount of replayability, and an incredibly intelligent design with a vast amount of strategy. The soundtrack, composed by Yuka Tsuchiyoko, is easily among the finest on the system. Even though that the Game Boy Advance didn't exactly have the best sound chip, it used every bit of power that it could to give us one of the most beautiful and grandest soundtracks on the Game Boy Advance. There's some great moments in the story, but the biggest accomplishment is how well it marries the story with the gameplay. It engages you more than any other game in the series that I've played thus far. And that's not just because you're a tactician that's actually on the battlefield, it's because of how well developed these characters are and how interesting they get with the support conversations. Some might enjoy hearing Hector and Eloyd's backstories when they talk to each other, while others might engage themselves in the relationship between Jafar and Nino. I could go on praising this game for an hour and wouldn't even be able to emphasize how brilliant of a game this is, so I'll leave it at this. Out of all the games that have come out for North America, Rekka No Ken still burns the brightest. If you've never played a Fire Emblem game, or if you've never played Fire Emblem entirely, then pick this one up and see why it's one of my favorite games of all time.